I hooked up with the supermodel wife of the guy my wife cheated with, and I'm planning to get divorced soon. We tied the knot almost 3 years ago after dating for nearly 5 years. About a year ago, she began an affair with a colleague. I first became suspicious when I noticed his car parked outside our home one day. That nagging feeling led me to hire a private investigator and, sure enough, I gathered solid proof that they were involved. Anger welled up inside me, and then, out of the blue, I got a call from the coworker's wife. She had discovered the affair as well, but all she had were some text messages between them. On the other hand, I had receipts and evidence of their outings, so we decided to confront them together. We started meeting up often to discuss what was happening. She confided that she had suspected something was off ever since she was pregnant. They have 3 kids together. At one point, we came up with the idea to sleep together as a form of revenge. We went through with it, and honestly, it felt good. We've been hooking up regularly since then. She's an incredible woman, and I must admit, she's better in bed in some ways than my own wife. Mostly, though, I'm filled with anger toward my wife. In some of the texts between her and her affair partner, they mocked his wife, saying horrible things like she'd gained weight and that her body was ruined. It's hard to believe my wife would say such things about another woman. She even made cruel jokes about my fertility issues, claiming I'm not a real man because my chances of having kids are low. I don't feel guilty about my own affair. I actually enjoyed the sex life I had with the coworker's wife much more than what I had with my own. My wife hardly ever gave me oral, but she always expected me to do it for her. At least his wife was enthusiastic about it, and it was the best I've ever had. Now she wants to tell her husband about what we've been doing. I guess we're both exhausted from this revenge affair, and it's gotten to a point where we can't stop. We were both so caught up in getting back at them that it became almost addictive. I'm planning to confront my wife soon. I've already got the divorce papers ready. Since we don't have any joint accounts or shared assets, it should be a straightforward process. The coworker's wife might face some challenges because of their kids, but she has the power to make him pay. I know this probably makes me sound like a terrible person, but I've already checked out of my marriage. I handed her the divorce papers on July 16th. I had to delay a bit to get a few things sorted out first, so I ended up serving the papers at her workplace. When she came home, I had already packed up her belongings and told her she needed to go stay with her dad. As expected, she did the usual routine, begging, apologizing, and even blaming me for her affair. I was ready for all of that. She was stubborn, though, and insisted she wasn't leaving and that she'd fix our marriage. I reminded her that the house belongs to my parents and their names are on the deed. If she didn't leave, I could easily have her evicted. I had already called her sister, thinking she'd come to take her away, but instead, her sister turned on me, saying I was a bad husband for giving up on my marriage so easily. That's when I got a bit petty and told her, it's pretty hypocritical. Coming from someone who left her husband for his cousin, looks like she's following in the family footsteps. She hit me, and I told her this was her final warning or I'd report her to the police for assault. After she left, the messages kept pouring in. I didn't block her because I wanted to screenshot most of them. She was sorry, begging me to take her back. Then she switched to mocking me, saying she never enjoyed our lovemaking and that she and her affair partner had sex on every piece of furniture in our house. I'm not sure how much of that is true, but I'm replacing the furniture regardless. I wanted to tell her that her affair partner's wife and I had defiled her car by having sex on it, but I held back. The most recent time we talked, she apologized once more, and this time it seemed more genuine. She admitted that she let things get out of hand and revealed that she's been considering having kids lately. As I've said before, I'm unable to have kids, and she was fully aware of that. She originally said she wanted to live without children, but now, in her mid-30s, she's developed a strong desire to be a mom. The fact that I couldn't give her that pushed her to cheat as a way to cope. She said she was wrong and that I was the best partner and husband anyone could ask for, but she just wanted more. I asked her why she didn't just talk to me about it. We could have adopted or gone to a sperm bank. I then asked if she was pregnant. She hesitated, but eventually murmured yes. I knew right then it wasn't my baby. Any hope of reconciliation was gone. Imagine if I hadn't discovered the affair, she would have tried to pass this pregnancy off as some miracle baby. I just congratulated her and wished her well with the baby. I want this divorce finalized as soon as possible. As for the affair partner's wife, she also served her husband with divorce papers and is ready to take him to the cleaners. She's not backing down. I've only talked to her a couple of times since then. She vented a lot about how she wasted her best years and youth on a man who turned out to be disgusting. She even mentioned how she gave up her modeling career to be with him. Honestly, I still think she's attractive. We haven't had much contact for a while. There was one time she drunk texted me, sending a sleazy picture and asking me to come over. I declined, and she later apologized for it. We're not planning on dating anytime soon, not until all the divorce proceedings are wrapped up. But I do miss her quite a bit. Now on to the next story. My wife betrayed me with my best friend. I'm going to ruin your career and make sure everyone knows what you both did. Jack and Emily, who are our dearest friends, have felt like family to my wife and me for many years, ever since we became neighbors. The four of us were practically joined at the hip. Our kids are the same age as theirs, and they all became fast friends. We were like one big family. We had dinner together a few times a week, and we even went on vacations as a group. I really considered Jack to be like a brother, and my wife and Emily were just as close. 5 months ago, I was completely blindsided when I discovered that my wife and Jack were having an affair. My wife had left her email open on our computer, and I noticed an email from her to her longtime therapist mentioning that Jack would be joining her for an upcoming session. Again. I mean, seriously? My mind started racing. Why on earth would Jack be going to her therapy sessions? And without me knowing, I searched through her emails and found more messages that confirmed Jack had been attending these sessions with her for about 6 weeks. I went through our phone records and discovered that, starting in late summer, they had been texting each other hundreds of times each day, with the count hitting nearly 500 texts a day by the holidays. Around that time, my wife and I had hosted both of our families, parents, siblings, everyone, for Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners. Jack and Emily joined us either for the meal or afterward, on both occasions. The phone records showed that the entire time they were at our house celebrating with our families, my wife and Jack were texting each other across the room. They did this pretty much every time the four of us hung out, and it had been going on for months. And of course, they were doing it all day, every day in general. But what really gets to me is that they were doing it with Emily and me right there. When I confronted my wife with the evidence, she admitted that yes, she and Jack had fallen in love. "It just happened. I don't know how, but I love him, and I just don't feel anything for you anymore. I'm sorry," she said. They had gone on a school district trip together, something had happened in her hotel room, and things escalated quickly from there. She explained while I lay face down on the couch, unable to look at her, that they had already made plans to move out and divorce me and Emily. While they didn't intend to move in together right away because of the kids, they figured it would probably happen eventually. According to her, the sessions with the therapist were mainly about finding a way to break this to me and Emily as gently as possible, because they were so concerned about our well-being. Emily and I'm pretty sure they never planned on telling us about the affair and were just going to discover their feelings for each other down the road after they had come up with some other excuse to leave us. My wife moved out 2 months ago. I was, and still am, completely devastated. I cry every day. I even cried while writing these first few paragraphs. I'm always concerned about how this will impact our kids. But I'm not someone who just sits back quietly when I've been wronged. And in this situation, I was very, very wronged. A couple of years ago, Jack decided to run for a seat on the Board of Education, even though he was considered a pretty unlikely candidate. I helped him out with his campaign materials and debate preparation, and my wife, who was well known as a school district employee, this detail becomes important later, did her best to spread the word. Surprisingly, he ended up winning, but just barely, by a few dozen votes. Once he was on the board, it quickly became the center of Jack's life. He joined every committee he could. This led to the beginning of his affair with my wife, as they were constantly attending school events and meetings together during the evenings and weekends. After I uncovered the affair, my mind swiftly turned to thoughts of revenge, and I realized that an extramarital affair between a Board of Education member and a school district employee was at the very least a bad look politically, and it might even have violated district policies. To make matters worse for them, my wife was in the running for an open administrative position, and everyone knew she was practically guaranteed to get the job, along with the significant pay raise that came with it. She had just completed her master's degree in school administration, encouraged by her principal and the superintendent, so she could step into this specific role. I had more than enough evidence of the affair, texts from both of them admitting to it, phone records showing they were texting each other hundreds of times a day, emails to and from the therapist, and so on. I thought about just emailing all the evidence to the board and the superintendent, but I figured that, as the heartbroken, betrayed spouse, I might not be viewed as a reliable source. So I was planning to show up at the next board meeting and publicly expose the two of them for their affair. I told my wife that I had tried to talk this person down, but couldn't promise they wouldn't show up and cause a scene. Just as I expected, this led Jack to decide that his only option was to admit the affair to the board preemptively. The superintendent then advised him to resign, which he did. Emily mentioned that he was utterly humiliated and crushed, and he barely got out of bed for a few days afterward. As word of the affair and Jack's resignation began to spread, the superintendent, who had been a longtime friend of both my wife and Jack, contacted my wife and tearfully informed her that it was no longer politically appropriate for her to be promoted to an administrative position within the district. The job that had been lined up for her was eventually filled by an external candidate. This news sent waves of confusion and rumors throughout the district, as it was widely assumed that my wife was going to get the position. The day after she was told she wouldn't be getting the promotion, my wife and I, despite the state of our crumbling marriage, took our son out to breakfast for his birthday. While we were at the restaurant, a parent came over to our table to congratulate her on the new job. She smiled and thanked them, then quietly excused herself to shed some tears in the bathroom. I let things settle down for a couple of weeks, and then, right before my wife moved out, I revealed my little secret to them. There was never any furious friend threatening to expose their affair. It was just me. Word of all this has spread around our small town, where Jack grew up and where my wife has worked for nearly 20 years. My wife refuses to discuss how things are going at work now, but I've heard from some people in the district that her once spotless reputation has taken a serious hit. Jack, who used to be the life of the party in our neighborhood and at local events, has practically disappeared. He barely even comes out to mow the lawn. He's moving soon, to a shabby little townhouse, about all he can afford with the child support he's now on the hook for. Despite the public humiliation, my wife and Jack claim they're going to try to make their relationship work. I wish them all the best with that. I'm sure it'll be a real treat for them to show up together in town. Here are some answers to common questions I've been asked. Are you and Emily a thing now? You should totally be a thing. That would be awesome. No, we're just friends. We've become incredibly important to each other since all this started, and we've definitely grown closer, but not in the way everyone might be thinking. This whole mess would be so much harder to deal with if I didn't have her to lean on, and she says the same about me. After all, we're going through the exact same situation with the same people. Jack hasn't moved out yet, but once he does, we plan to start getting the kids together more often, like they used to. Of course, it'll never be quite the same. She does bring the kids over sometimes, but it's tough with Jack still living right across the street. Didn't your revenge hurt both sets of kids? Not really. Jack has a regular job. The Board of Education was more of a hobby and passion for him, so this didn't affect his income. And my wife has been assured that if she wants to pursue an administrative position in another district, she'll get glowing letters of recommendation from her superintendent and principal. She'll have to give up a lot of work relationships in the process, but with her reputation taking a hit, I'm guessing she'll make that move sooner rather than later. In the meantime, not taking the administrative job means she still has summers off to spend with the kids. Why do you call her your wife instead of your ex-wife? We're still working through the divorce mediation, so it's not final yet, but it will be soon. Why didn't you notice all the texting your wife was doing? Well, I did notice, and it was really starting to annoy me. It was excessive. She has a big social circle and tends to text a lot anyway, but it was getting way over the top, to the point where she was completely ignoring me and the kids. At one point in November, I asked her to agree to a no phones at the dinner table rule. She reluctantly agreed, but then she'd just sulk through dinner, and eventually she started using her phone during dinner again. All that said, I was blind. Not only was the texting getting strange, but her relationship with Jack was starting to make me uncomfortable. Emily noticed it too and agreed. We confronted them a couple of times about it directly, and they both swore up and down that it was just school stuff they were discussing, nothing else. And for whatever reason, we believed them, probably because it's easier to ignore what you don't want to see. Now on to the next story. My ex-wife reached out to let me know that the guy she cheated with and left me for is treating her badly. I told her I don't give a damn, and now people are shaming me on social media. I'm 31 now, and my ex-wife, who I'll call Lisa, is 35. We got married 10 years ago, just as I turned 21 and finished college. We were together for 5 years. For most of that time, I thought we were happy. I know I was. I've always worked in IT, and that hasn't changed. We rarely argued, and our sex life seemed pretty good. But a few months before I caught her cheating, she started to pull away. She used to be the one who would often initiate intimacy, but that suddenly changed. What was once a daily thing became weekly, and then, in the last 2 weeks before I exposed her, it stopped entirely. I discovered her affair when she left her phone out one day, and it was still open to a nude selfie she'd sent to some number I didn't recognize. As devastated as I was, I kept my cool and snapped pictures of her phone with mine. I went through her messages and saw the whole conversation between her and the guy, a gym buddy I was unknowingly footing the bill for. I didn't confront her immediately because those texts told me everything I needed to know. They'd been hooking up in our bed while I was at work. I stayed quiet, and the next Saturday, when I knew she'd be out at her so-called double yoga class, which she claimed would take about 3 hours, I packed up my things, loaded the car, and left. I had already consulted with a divorce lawyer, so I knew I'd be okay. At 25, I wasn't swimming in money. Her father had left her around $200,000 when he passed, so she was well off, but I had no claim to that, nor did I want one. We didn't have kids, even though she'd always said we would start trying when she hit 30. That birthday came and went, but instead of starting a family with me, she chose to cheat. Even though I was the only one working, Lisa had a hefty amount of money in her own right and a college degree. She'd even taught school for a couple of years before we got married. I left the divorce papers on the kitchen table. Naturally, she blew up my phone later with all kinds of apologies, begging and pleading, but I ignored her. Her friends called too, leaving nasty messages about how I was a coward and never truly loved her. Otherwise, how could I just ghost her? I didn't respond to any of them. The only person I did call was the guy's wife, who dumped him on the spot. I guess it worked out for my ex though, because she and her boyfriend got married just a few months after our divorce was finalized. The only time I saw her again was in court to finalize the divorce, where I didn't have to pay a dime in alimony. It was a clean break. She didn't look at me once, just kept her head down. She even brought her gym boyfriend with her, and he kept flexing, trying to look tough, like he was ready to fight. I just shook my head at him, thinking, "You're getting exactly what you deserve." Since then, I've gone on a few dates and had sex a couple of times, but I haven't been in another long-term relationship. That's by choice. In many ways, I'm still not over what happened. I don't love her anymore, but I've lost interest in falling in love again. I've reconnected with some friends I'd neglected during my marriage, mainly because my ex disapproved of me being friends with anyone. I used to be active on Facebook, but now I don't bother. Anyone I care about, I see or talk to directly, so I don't need it. Apparently, Lisa spun some story that I was mentally abusive, and that's why she had no choice but to leave me for her affair partner. My parents and close friends didn't buy it though. She even tried to get me fired by selling that lie to my boss, probably as revenge for wrecking her boyfriend's marriage. It's ironic since it was his newfound single life that finally made an honest woman out of her. I just showed my boss the texts where she begged for mercy and forgiveness, admitting to the affair and acknowledging I was a good husband. He basically apologized and handed me 2 weeks of paid time off to heal. Fast forward 6 years, and I'm still unmarried, working in the same area and for the same firm, but earning more. I have my own house, a fair amount of savings, a 401k, a car, and life is generally wonderful. I'm content with where I am. I can do whatever I want, when I want, and I don't have to answer to anyone. Sure, I could buy a house if I wanted, but I'm content with where I am. Then, only last week, Lisa, my ex, began messaging me again. I never blocked her number because there was no real need. She hadn't tried to reach out since those desperate messages years ago, begging me not to go through with the divorce and telling me that her affair partner, who she's now married to, didn't mean anything to her, blah, blah, blah. Her initial messages were friendly. "Hey, it's Lisa. Long time no talk. How've you been? I know I messed up. Can we talk?" Then she started calling me, at least 10 times. I didn't pick up and I didn't reply to her texts either. Is this still your number? I talked to your friend and he said you're still using it since you replied to him. Please talk to me. Next, she started telling me how much she missed me and how I was the only man who ever treated her right. Then came the more personal stuff. Affair partner is such a jerk. He hurts me. I don't know what to do. Letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I still ignored her. Then she started listing the ways he's been hurting her. I don't ever want to be in touch with her again. So I texted our mutual friend, a guy who once called me a coward but who I still keep in contact with because I know his family. I told him what Lisa said and asked him to reach out to the authorities if her claims were true, because I don't give a damn about Lisa anymore. I wouldn't care if she starved in the street or died, but maybe her friends care. I actually used those exact words. Looking back, it's clear I do care, at least enough to send such a hateful message through someone else. But I didn't want to get directly involved. I also think Lisa is trying to manipulate the nice guy I used to be. The old me would have rushed to her rescue and been a shoulder to cry on. Not anymore. The mutual friend told me I was a terrible person and a monster, yada yada. I told him to go to hell and then blocked him. For the first time in ages, I logged into Facebook. As expected, not a single person I once considered a friend had reached out to comfort me or offer support when I was getting cheated on and divorced. I got a lot of support from my family and real friends, including coworkers who become close outside of work. Now, Lisa's friends have been sending me messages saying they were right to support her because I'm abandoning her in her time of need. Like seriously, what the hell am I supposed to do? I'm her ex-husband, the guy she cheated on. They know about the alleged abuse, so as her friends, what are they doing about it? I'm just some guy she hurt a long time ago. But the abuse kept coming. So I screenshot all the texts she sent me recently, along with the ones from years ago. I've never changed my number and I never delete anything, and decided to stop taking the high road on social media. I plastered all their feeds with her messages where she begged me to take her back and admitted to cheating. Finally, they left me alone. Now she's still texting, complaining about what I said to the mutual friend and accusing me of never loving her, calling me an evil person. I haven't responded to her. Honestly, I feel good about what I did, and in a twisted way, I feel like I've got closure. Lisa, if you're reading this, f*** off and mind your business. Now on to the next story. Discovered my wife was sleeping with her coworker while I was focused on building our future. Now I'm heading for divorce and planning a bit of payback. I, 27 male, is married to 26 female. We've been together for 5 years, married for 3. No kids, both of us working decent jobs in IT. We don't own any property, just renting an apartment. Our finances, mostly separate. No loans hanging over us, and our earnings are about the same. Here's the thing. 10 days ago, I found out that she was cheating on me. Yes, you heard that right. I overheard her talking on the phone, and as soon as I entered the room, the call just stopped. At 3 a.m., I did what I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. What did I find? The call logs from that evening were wiped clean, gone. That made me suspicious, so I dug deeper. That's when I found out she's using Telegram, something I didn't even know she had because we always use WhatsApp for everything. Lately, I've been buried in work, trying to secure a promotion. Competing against 2 other colleagues, it's been intense, so I haven't been around much, not at home, not paying attention. Turns out she's been having an affair with a coworker. It's been going on for about 9 weeks. They've been sexting, swapping nude pictures, getting pretty creative, I'd say. It's obvious now it was just about sex, just a bit of fun. She's mentioned to him a few times that she doesn't want him thinking it's anything more than that. They've hooked up 4 times. I took screenshots of everything, every dirty little message, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her. I was in shock, completely rattled. I thought if I brought it up, everything would just implode. For days, I was numb, didn't know what to do with myself. She asked if I was okay, and I just mumbled something about work being stressful. People at the office started noticing too, asking if I was all right, so I lied. I said my aunt had passed away. Then, I took 2 weeks off and let HR know about the cheating. 4 days ago, she told me she was going on a trip, supposedly for work, but I knew better. I was a wreck, threw up that morning, felt feverish, so I begged her to stay. She just said she'd love to, but the trip was important. At that moment I knew this marriage was done. I asked my brother to tail her and get proof. Yesterday he caught them, right in the act. A picture of them kissing, that was it. Proof, plain as day. I was crushed. I cried, like really cried. Wanted to drink myself numb, but my brother wouldn't let me. I wanted revenge, so I decided I'm going to tell her I'm seeing someone else and then walk out. I know she'll try to play the victim, spin some sob story to her friends and her very conservative parents, who'll probably be furious at me, but then I'll drop the bomb. Show everyone the proof. No one will believe her, not even her own family. I talked to my dad's friend, who's also our neighbor and a lawyer. He said the divorce should be smooth since I've got evidence. There's nothing much to divide anyway, just some jewelry my mom gave her. Today, I'm packing up and moving out to stay with a friend who has an extra room. I'm just waiting for her to come home so I can leave. My wedding ring already off my finger. Update. I can see that she's deeply remorseful and willing to do anything I ask, but I'm still torn. Should I forgive her? I wrote this post about 8 days ago, but only got around to posting it yesterday, so here's what's happened since then. When I told her I had an affair, she was completely blindsided. I tried to get out of there as quickly as possible, with my clothes already packed in the car, but she wouldn't let me go without a barrage of questions. She kept asking, "Who is she? Do you really love her more than me?" She started to mumble and I just snapped, yelling, "Let go." I hadn't raised my voice in all our 5 years together, but I bolted to my car and left. After that, she called me at least 10 times, which I ignored. Then the texts started flooding in. Hundreds of them. I finally texted back, telling her to stop or I'd block her and that we could discuss our future in a few days. The texts slowed down, and eventually we agreed to meet. 3 days later, we met up. She looked terrible, weak, hadn't eaten, and her eyes were swollen from crying. She began by saying she knows I don't have an affair because she knows the kind of person I am and that I've never had the time for something like that. She begged me not to leave, saying she's sorry and desperately wants my forgiveness. After half an hour, I came clean. She then admitted that the trip wasn't all work, but that she'd only been with him for 3 days. The extra day, that was just for fooling around, which is why she couldn't stay to take care of me. I asked for her phone and she handed it over. Surprisingly, nothing had been deleted. She told me she'd blocked her affair partner and told him never to contact her again. She insisted he meant nothing to her and that she only loves me. She also confessed everything to her HR and said she plans to quit. She even reached out to the affair partner's wife with the proof. I told her I didn't believe her and that I wanted a divorce. She broke down, crying, pleading for another chance. It took about 2 hours and then, at her home, the affair partner's wife showed up. My wife asked for forgiveness from her too, showing proof of them hanging out, kissing, and exchanging texts. The woman started crying and cursing my wife, telling her she hopes our marriage falls apart. She left, but I gave her my number for any additional proof she might need. I asked my wife what she thought would happen, what was the outcome she was expecting. We were supposed to buy a home this year, start a family next. She had no answer, just silence. I could tell she was genuinely sorry, and I'm sure she wouldn't do it again. But why should I give her another chance? I've spent the last 5 years dedicated to loving her and building our life together. The next day, her father called me, apologizing on her behalf and saying it's up to me whether to divorce or not. He asked me to consider giving her another chance, saying she's sincere in wanting to make things right. Since then, nothing much has changed. I've gone back to the office. My wife hasn't resigned yet, but it seems her affair partner has. HR apparently fired him, while she's been put on hold since she's crucial to the team. I found this out through Facebook from HR. She keeps texting me and even visited my brother, thinking I was staying with him. But as soon as she realized I wasn't there, she left. Right now, nothing's really progressed. I know she's incredibly remorseful and she's done everything I could ask for, but should I forgive her? The truth is, I still love her, but I don't want to end up in a toxic or loveless marriage, and I need to know that I can trust my partner completely. Now on to the next story. My unfaithful wife cheated on me while I was in the army. and now her lousy new boyfriend is treating her badly. So I'm in the Army, and back then I was married. My first deployment to Iraq was coming up, and the stress was really getting to both of us. My wife, understandably, started begging me to find a way to stay home, to avoid going at all. You know, the usual things any wife would worry about. We didn't have any kids yet, though we both wanted them, so we talked about getting out of debt while I was gone to make a better life when I got back. She decided to move back to her home state and stay with her best friend, who agreed to charge her just $300 in rent. This way, we could save more money and be ready to start our family once I returned. I was actually pretty happy with this plan. It seemed like a good way to get ahead. As I was leaving, she stood there, tears pouring down her face, saying how much she'd miss me and how deeply she loved me. We made this heartfelt promise to start our family the moment I got back. 2 months into my deployment, things started to change. She became distant, barely talking on our scheduled calls, and when she did, it was short, like 1 or 2 word answers. We'd been together for 6 years by then, and she was never short on words before. Out of the blue, she hit me with the news that she needed some space. Can you believe that? Space from someone who's already 1,000 miles away. When I asked what she meant, she just said she needed to find herself. My mind immediately flashed back to this guy back home. He was always hanging around, a bit too familiar, and frankly, a bit inappropriate. I wasn't usually the jealous type, and I trusted her, but suddenly I started noticing that he was in every group photo she posted. Everyone else in the pictures rotated, but not him. For the first time ever, I felt this sharp sting of jealousy and unease that was completely foreign to me. It pushed me to a place I never thought I'd go. I ended up cloning her phone, something I never imagined I'd do. Now, every text she sent and received, I got too. I'll never forget the first message I saw after doing that. "Hey babe, I'll see you after work. Want me to save you some of my leftovers?" That text from her to him hit me like a truck. It completely shattered me. I lost 35 pounds in a week. I couldn't eat or sleep. I was glued to that phone, watching every single conversation, seeing them talk about trying to have a baby together. It was everything a married person fears. I confronted her, asking if she was seeing someone, and she denied it, telling me she was just taking care of herself and that she loved me, blah, blah, blah. I didn't tell her I'd been getting her texts for 2 months. Finally, she confessed to cheating, saying he was better than me in bed, treated her right, and did everything she wanted. During that time, she used the money I was earning to pay off our debts, get matching I love you tattoos with him, go to shows, buy clothes, the whole 9 yards. And that's when I decided it was time for some payback. I froze our bank account for a month and changed every password to something she'd never guess, using Army slang terms, of course. I blocked her on Facebook and my phone, cutting off any way for her to contact me. Eventually, she lost her car to repossession, got kicked out of her place, and had to sell her prized shoes and purses just to survive. Eventually, I found out she had gotten a job back at her old restaurant. So I decided to go nuclear. I posted every single text conversation between her and the guy talking about having babies with timestamps. I matched those with our own conversations and let all our friends see exactly what she'd been up to. Then, I got a few friends to start calling her workplace, constantly complaining about her and the guy. It didn't stop there. I even had friends dine and dash at the restaurant. In the end, they both got fired. In retaliation, she tried calling my command, claiming I'd abandoned her and that she couldn't support herself. But my commander? He was fully aware of the situation and did nothing. He'd been through something similar himself. Then, about a month before I was set to return, she called me from a different number, sobbing and telling me she was pregnant with his kid. Mind you, I was still deployed, so a divorce wasn't even possible yet. She ended up moving 10 hours away with him. On April 24, 2018, she called me again, 5 months pregnant, crying uncontrollably and asking where she should go. Apparently, they had a massive fight and she was planning to leave him. All I said was, "Sorry, not my problem anymore." Fast forward to January this year, and she calls me again, this time from a mutual friend's phone. Her: "He hit me. I don't know what to do." Me: "Well, maybe you shouldn't have cheated on your husband while he was deployed for some guy who talked a big game." Her: "So, I guess you're happy about this?" Me: "No, but at least I know now that I'm not the bad guy in this story. Then, the very next month, she calls again. Her. He's cheating on me with 2 other girls. I'm so sorry, I ruined everything. Me. Yeah, you did. This woman tore my life apart, plunging me into a deep depression I'm still grappling with, but strangely enough, having the proof that I wasn't the problem makes it a little easier to bear. Looking back, if this had happened even 10 or 5 years ago, I would have come home to an empty bank account, an empty house, and a pregnant wife carrying another man's baby. Unbelievably, she reached out yesterday asking if I could help her with rent. Edit. To clear up a few things, I should mention that we got divorced before the kid was born, so I have no financial obligations to her, and it's been nearly a year since. I used T-Mobile's Digit service to clone her phone. Google it if you're curious, I don't feel like explaining it in detail. And no, I wasn't celebrating the fact that she got physically abused. I did tell her to call the cops, but that's where my responsibility ends. It's wrong to hurt someone, but I'm not responsible for her well-being anymore. Now on to the next story. Revealing my unfaithful wife's betrayal to our entire family at her 50th birthday bash. So I've got something I need to unload. Found out my wife, let's call her Lisa, had been sneaking around, having an affair. And let me tell you, the emotions that hit me were like a whirlwind, spinning out of control, pushing me to make a decision that altered the course of our lives forever. It all kicked off when I stumbled upon some incriminating stuff on Lisa's phone. We're talking texts, explicit photos, and videos exchanged with another guy. It felt like a sucker punch straight to the gut. All the trust we'd built over the years, gone, just like that, crushed in an instant. Anger, hurt, betrayal, every possible emotion flooding in all at once. I couldn't just sit on this. I couldn't let her get away with it. I needed Lisa to feel the pain she'd inflicted on me, on our family, and what better opportunity than her 50th birthday bash? A gathering of all our friends and family. Yeah, I know, it sounds extreme, but I was riding a wave of anger and desperation. In the days leading up to the party, I meticulously crafted a PowerPoint presentation. Not your usual office stuff. This one was designed to blow the lid off Lisa's affair. But as I worked on it, I started to rethink my approach. Maybe I shouldn't just hit them with the dirty laundry. Maybe I should remind everyone of the good times, the beautiful moments we'd shared over the years. So, at the party, I stood up, took a deep breath, and started my speech. I talked about how Lisa and I first met, our wedding day, the birth of our daughter, all those countless happy memories. I wanted everyone to remember the love that was once there. But then, just when the room was warm with nostalgia, I hit him with the PowerPoint. The screen changed, and suddenly the dirty truth was out there for everyone to see. The conversations between Lisa and her lover all laid bare. The shock on their faces was something I'll never forget. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more intense, I had one more surprise. I'd swapped out Lisa's original birthday cake for one that had explicit images of her and her lover on it. As the cake was brought out, I encouraged everyone to sing "Happy Birthday" to Lisa, who by now was completely distraught. It was a moment no one saw coming, and it hit like a freight train. To seal the deal, I handed Lisa divorce papers right there in front of everyone. The room fell silent, and tears streamed down her face. It was devastating for her, but I felt, well, I don't even know what I felt at that moment. After the dust settled, Lisa's family, her parents included, blasted me for what I'd done. They said I'd gone too far, that I'd humiliated her in public, and it was just cruel. But to my relief, my own family, including our daughter, stood by me. They got it. They understood the hell I'd been through and thought my actions were justified, even if they were extreme. Looking back, I do wonder if there was a better way to handle it. Maybe counseling, maybe a private conversation, something less explosive. But in that moment, I was driven to expose the truth in the most dramatic way possible. I'm not sharing this to encourage anyone to do what I did. No, this is more of a cautionary tale. Infidelity messes with your head, makes you do things you never thought you would. It's important to seek support, talk things through, and think long and hard about the consequences before making any decisions that could blow up your life and the lives of those around you. Okay, let me clarify a few things I didn't mention before. My ex-wife Lisa didn't fight the divorce. She owned up to the affair and surprisingly said my demanding work schedule pushed her into the arms of another man. She said this guy made her feel young, desirable, filled a void she believed I couldn't. And my daughter, man, she knew something was off but didn't know what. Lisa manipulated the situation, fed her lies to keep the secret under wraps. It tears me apart knowing my daughter had to deal with that kind of confusion and emotional turmoil. And that affair partner? Turns out he used to work for me before the pandemic. I had to let him go because of financial issues, never imagining he'd weasel his way back into my life, this time to destroy my marriage. After the birthday party debacle, my former in-laws threatened to take legal action, thinking I'd gone way over the line. But Lisa talked them down, admitting she deserved the fallout from her actions. At least she took responsibility for that. Since the divorce, Lisa's been filled with regret. She's finally realized just how much damage she caused, not just to me, but to our whole family. While I appreciate the apology, the trust we once had is gone, shattered beyond repair. On a personal note, I've been trying to embrace single life, rediscover who I am outside of a broken marriage. It's been tough and I've had some pretty dark thoughts, but my love for my daughter keeps me grounded, gives me a reason to push through. I could never put her through the pain of losing a parent. And to anyone out there doubting my story, thinking it's all fake or exaggerated, here's my response. Kiss my ass. This is my life, my pain, my journey. I'm sharing it to find support and connect with others who might be going through something similar. If you don't believe it, that's on you, but don't diminish what I've been through. Life throws some brutal punches, but it's our resilience and the support of others that help us make it through the darkest moments. Now on to the next story. My IT pro friend shamed his cheating wife in front of hundreds of people. Now the entire city knows she's a whore. This all went down before smartphones were everywhere, back when life was a little less connected. So I had this buddy, let's call him Bob. Bob was always a bit suspicious of his wife's social circle, especially after one of her closest friends got caught cheating and tried to drag Bob's wife down with her. Bob didn't have any solid proof at the time, so things cooled off for a bit. Now, Bob wasn't just your average guy. He was an IT wizard, really knew his way around computers and networks. Fast forward nearly a year and Bob starts noticing his wife acting shady again, especially after she went to her high school reunion. He confided in me and we tossed around a few ideas, one of which was him jokingly mentioning a keylogger, but eventually Bob just asked me to drop it and, more importantly, don't tell anyone, not even your wife. A couple of months roll by and one early morning around 5:30 to 6:00, I'm getting ready for work when I get a Facebook Messenger notification. It's a link from Bob, but sent in a group chat. This chat included literally everyone we knew, her family, his family, our friends, strangers, you name it. It looked like a phishing link at first, so I didn't open it, even though it was from Bob, who's usually super careful about these things. Not long after, I get an email from Bob with some ominous, unsavory comments and the same link. This time, it's a group email with all the recipients openly copied. His wife's work, her family, her friends, his family, and even people I didn't recognize. That's when I knew it was legit, so I clicked on it. The link took me to a hastily thrown together website packed with pictures and videos of his wife with another man. This wasn't some hidden camera footage either. It was screenshots, even video screen captures, weeks and weeks of them. Bob had added snarky captions and colorful names for his wife and her lover. It was an overwhelming amount of evidence. Videos of her masturbating with her lover, chat logs where they couldn't wait to hook up again, solo masturbation videos of both her and him, tons of pictures. And the kicker? She was trash-talking Bob to her lover, making comments about how much bigger and better he was. The way she stroked her lover's ego was particularly gut-wrenching. I dropped everything and called Bob. He was drunk, combative, had been up all night making that website while drowning himself in booze. He had nothing good to say about women at that point. He was a mess. But after some work, I managed to convince him to take the site down before it did irreparable damage to his marriage, their careers, and their kids. As he's sobbing and logging in to remove the site, I hear loud yelling in the background as his wife bursts into the room. A screaming match breaks out, and there's nothing I can do to reel him back in. Apparently her mom or sister saw the page, blew up her phone until she woke up, and then she saw it herself and went on the offensive. The call drops after about 30 seconds of her screaming, while Bob's calling her every name in the book. After that, I couldn't get in touch with him again. The site stayed up the rest of the day, and Bob even put a view counter on it. Hundreds of people ended up watching her masturbate with a married former classmate. Bob had done his homework though. He'd installed a keylogger that recorded everything on the screen. Whenever he was out, she'd log into the PC and Facebook to play around with her boyfriend. Bob tracked down her lover, his family, his wife, her family, his job, the whole shebang. All these people were added to the Facebook and email groups. I don't know what happened to her lover or his marriage, but I know what became of Bob's life. His wife was desperate to fix things, offering him anything to make amends. But in the end, it was her comments about her lover's prowess that did her in. Bob tried to take her back, even after all their friends and family had seen her naked and cheating. But he just couldn't get past those comments about his manhood. Bob eventually left her, packed on about 100 pounds, and then moved as far away as possible, becoming a shell of the person he once was. I've lost touch with him. He went scorched earth on most of his friendships and family ties. As for her, she's let herself go and now looks like a bowling ball with legs. The line forms at the rear. A former friend set a trap for his cheating wife, then shared all the dirty evidence with her friends, family, employer, and the boyfriend's wife, family, and employer. Lives were shattered. Now on to the next story. My cheating wife keeps piling on demands, blaming me for her sleeping with other men. Just recently, I, 30, married my wife, 30. We spent 6 years together before making it official, with 3 of those years engaged. Thanks to COVID, we had to push back the wedding twice. She's wrestled with mental health challenges like depression, ADHD, and anxiety all along. As time passed, especially during the pandemic, it feels like these struggles have only deepened. The lockdowns hit her hard, particularly the isolation and the stress from a family health scare. During that time, she lost her job, but luckily found a new one not long after. However, it was remote, with some pretty unpredictable hours. I always did my best to support her. She told me that I was the only person who made her feel capable of becoming the person she wanted to be. However, I guess that feeling faded at some point. A few months after our wedding, she caught COVID and experienced lingering symptoms for a while. It was tough on her both mentally and physically. Just when she was mostly recovered after several months, she caught COVID again, and the long-haul symptoms came back. This time, we knew better how to handle it, so her recovery was a bit quicker. But the stress still took a heavy toll. After the second bout of COVID, we became much more cautious, masking up more frequently. We only dined indoors on special occasions and wore masks in bars. We even braved the cold to sit outside at places that still offered outdoor seating. Even with all the precautions we took, she fell into a deeper depression than I'd ever witnessed and decided to take a break from work. During that period, I stepped up to care for her, managed all the chores, and kept up with my full-time job. While she was on leave, she started showing some improvement. She tried various activities like taking classes, but the only thing she stuck with consistently was yoga. Her sleep schedule was all over the place due to the depression, so she struggled to fall asleep at a reasonable hour, often staying up late, napping during the day, and continuing this cycle. This led her to attend late yoga classes, which would give her energy afterward. She'd tell me she was going to meet up with friends from class at a bar, or that she planned to draw at a bar alone to think things over, or that she needed to reflect on therapy. Usually, she'd say she intended to stay out for an hour or two and then come home, but she'd end up saying just a couple more hours to think and stay out until the bars closed, sometimes coming home drunk. During her recovery from depression and long COVID, I felt this was an unhealthy way to cope, and it worsened her sleep even more. It caused her to sleep through the day, missing out on vitamin D, and sleep quality is so crucial for mental health. I voiced my concerns, but she's always been defensive about my feedback. I've journaled about it many times and brought it up with her, even suggested she discuss it with her therapist. However, in our couples therapy sessions, we never really addressed my issues with her communication. We mainly focused on strategies to prevent me from triggering her past trauma and how we could both de-escalate conflicts, which were valuable lessons, of course. But I guess this time it was just too much for her. When she went out, other guys would approach her. Eventually, one of them wore down her defenses and she ended up making out with him. She gave him her alternate email and they started meeting up for more makeout sessions, which eventually led to sex. There were also 2 other people she connected with, telling them she only wanted something purely physical. She claims she never had actual sex with them, though just sent dirty texts and masturbated to their messages. I found out about all this one day when I picked up her phone to charge it while she was napping. We have each other's Face ID and thumbprints, and when you start charging, the screen lights up and shows past notifications. I saw a strange text, so I opened her phone to check it out. I didn't think much of it at first, no suspicions at all, until I realized what I was actually reading. My curiosity led me down a rabbit hole because I thought we were always so open with each other. I was devastated. But I also noticed emails from this guy sent to her alternate email account, which she doesn't keep open by default. I forwarded those emails to myself so she couldn't deny anything later. When she woke up from her nap, we talked and cried together. I was completely shattered and numb, but her remorse seemed genuine. She told me she was desperate to feel wanted, young, and alive again. She said she never wanted to be with anyone else and admitted she was mentally messed up, apologizing for destroying our marriage. I still wanted to work on things, her mental health, our relationship, and I told her I was willing to stay with her. The next day was tough, but somehow we managed to get through it. Then she had a therapy session. Afterward, we talked about it. Her therapist seemed to suggest that she had never done this before, so it wasn't who she really is. She felt trapped and craved attention. The leave from work and the freedom was helping her mental health, which was true. The way I discovered her actions was a violation of her privacy. During this conversation, she became defensive, almost blaming me for what she did. I wasn't happy with what seemed like a lack of guilt on her part. Over the next few days, she started to take responsibility, and I began to hope we could grow from this. But then, just 5 days after I found out, she told me she wanted to think about what to do with her job after an afternoon yoga class. Afterward, she kept delaying when she'd come home. I told her to take her time, but eventually she promised to be home by 2. I reminded her that she couldn't repeat the same behavior that led to the cheating so soon after it happened. How could she expect me to trust her? I tracked her location through her phone and went to the bar she was at. I reiterated my feelings in person. She insisted she was staying until 2, and that was that. I left, and she did come home later. I don't think she cheated again, but the situation left me uneasy. The day after our couples therapy session, she had a follow-up appointment with her own therapist just a few hours later. Ever since then, it feels like she's almost disappeared from my life. She gives me these loose, vague plans, saying she's grabbing dinner with a friend, but nothing more specific than that. She claims she needs space. She's been coming home late, passing out on the couch until I wake up, then slipping into our bed just before it's time for her to head out again. From what we've discussed in therapy, I've got this strong feeling she's about to ask me to make changes so she doesn't feel trapped. And honestly, the last thing I want is for her to feel that way. I just want her to be healthy, to find healthier ways to cope, and to genuinely want to be with me. She still texts me, "I love you," but she hasn't said those words aloud in a week. I'm terrified she's planning to separate more completely. And it's not just me I'm worried about. I'm scared for her too. She's had suicidal thoughts before, and all I want is for her to be okay. I can't shake the feeling that she's projecting her parents' relationship onto ours. And now anything I do is going to seem controlling or irritating to her. I have this suspicion that her therapist is hearing this skewed version of events and might be pushing for a separation. And honestly, based on what the therapist has heard, I can't say they're wrong. But it feels like my wife is being selective about what she shares. Like, she didn't mention the cheating to her therapist for the entire 2 months it was happening. I doubt she's talked about how often she's been out drinking alone either. I'm really anxious about our next couples therapy session because I can't shake the feeling she's going to drop the bomb that she's moving out. If I try to resist, I'm pretty sure I'll be called controlling again. It's hard to wrap my head around the fact that we've ended up here. The therapist once told me, just because she feels trapped doesn't mean you're the one trapping her. But now I'm worried that my wife, who's often felt overshadowed when we talk, is choosing this moment to stand her ground. It feels like the worst possible timing, but I don't want to lose her and have to rebuild my life from scratch. At the same time, I'm afraid that if I just go along with it, she'll think she's right about me wanting to control her, which would just lead to a life of resentment on her end. I know I'm not blameless. We were in therapy before any of this happened for a reason. I can be argumentative, and she's triggered by confrontation because of her past trauma. We've worked hard on it, and I've made progress, but I'm not perfect. More than anything, I want her to be happy and healthy, and I thought she knew that. So how can she believe I'm trying to control her when I'm really just concerned that she's coping in unhealthy ways? I don't know how I'm coming across as I write this, but I'm feeling pretty numb right now. I can't stress enough how much I try to understand her in every conversation, even if she thinks I'm just trying to win, or if things get heated because of my tone or her triggers. It's the main thing we've worked on, and it kills me that she truly believes I want to control her when all I'm suggesting is something as simple as being home by midnight on weekdays and getting enough sleep to protect her mental health. Now on to the next story. My wife betrayed me with my best friend while I was at work, so I destroyed his life by getting him sent to jail and left her without a home. Background. My wife, Amanda, and I were raised in a town of around 30,000 people. We met at a young age, probably around 6 or 7, though I can't remember exactly. From then on, we were almost inseparable. By the time we turned 16, we started dating, and at 18, we moved to a city just a few hours away for work. At 20, we got married and bought our first home. Then, at 22, we discovered we were expecting a baby boy. That's when tragedy struck. About 5 weeks before Amanda was supposed to go on maternity leave, a massive shelving unit at her workplace collapsed and crushed her. I was told that both she and our unborn child died instantly. 2 of her colleagues were also injured in the accident. One was left paralyzed and the other lost a leg, which had to be amputated. The company she worked for had decided, as a cost-cutting measure, to keep using old shelving that had been declared unsafe instead of replacing it. This thing was replaced every week at approximately the same time every week and had to be paid by an insurance company to replace the shelving during the fire. To this day, I still can't fully forgive the executives and managers who made that decision, because it took away the love of my life and our unborn child. Not long after, I was given what they called a choice on how to proceed with what her company referred to as compensation, but to me, it was just blood money. They wanted to settle out of court to avoid a lawsuit, but I was determined to make them pay. This isn't the revenge part. This is still background. Thankfully, due to the media coverage and the involvement of several politicians, the case was settled in court within about 3 years. The payout for all parties was nearly 10 times what they initially offered. The company faced numerous fines for workplace safety violations, and several executives were fired or jailed. That's a story for another time, maybe when I feel ready to share it. During all of this, I continued working my job in telecommunications. My mother, bless her soul, moved in with me during this time to help out. Honestly, I think I would have fallen apart if she hadn't been there for me. Around this time, I was offered a promotion, but it involved a lot of travel across the state. I requested to have an office in my hometown's branch so I could manage business both statewide and locally, as there was no business representative in my hometown. Thankfully, they agreed. After a few months, I settled into a routine, 1 to 2 weeks in the city office, 1 week in my hometown, and 1 to 2 weeks visiting the rest of the state. A year later, I decided to buy a house in my hometown so I wouldn't have to stay at my parents' place whenever I was home and could have the freedom to come and go as I pleased. This detail will be important later in the story. Our story really begins about 4 years later. Apologies if the backstory was a bit lengthy. One Friday, after returning from one of my trips, I was checking in some things at my office when Harry, the branch's managing director, walked in. Harry and I had known each other since childhood, though we went to different schools. Since my return to the hometown, we had developed a close friendship. He asked how I was doing and then invited me to a house party he was hosting that evening. That evening, Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new hire at the branch where my hometown office was located, and she was getting to know everyone since she was new in town. We clicked right away. I know it sounds cliche, but it felt like Amanda was standing right in front of me again, except it was Catherine. I won't bore you with too many details, but after 2 years of dating, Catherine and I decided to take the next step, and she moved into my house in the hometown. Everything seemed to be going well. Catherine got along with my parents, and Amanda's parents were happy that someone could bring me as much joy as Amanda had. Skype calls were suddenly cut short. Neighbors mentioned seeing a car that looked a lot like Harry's parked in the back alley near my house whenever I was away, and I found clothes in my wardrobe that weren't mine. All signs pointed to cheating, but Catherine assured me nothing was going on. She explained that Harry would occasionally come over to discuss work, but never stayed the night. I chalked it up to paranoia and carried on as if nothing was wrong, but something deep down just didn't feel right. About 6 months later, I discovered that she had been lying to me. I had just closed a big contract with a new company, and the negotiations wrapped up sooner than expected. Instead of sticking around for the next few days, I decided to catch an early flight home and surprise everyone. A few hours later, I arrived in my hometown and drove down the alley behind my house to sneak in and surprise Catherine, but part of me was curious to see if that mystery car was there. Sure enough, there was a car blocking the back entrance gate. At first, I thought it might just be a careless neighbor, but then I realized it was Harry's car. If it weren't for the tall hedges I had planted a few years back for privacy, I might have driven right past my own place without noticing. I pulled up behind his car, got out, and found it odd that he was still there so late, especially since Catherine had assured me he always left by now. As I approached the back of the house, my stomach dropped. There, in my kitchen, I saw Catherine and Harry going at it, completely engrossed in each other. I froze, time stood still. There was my close friend, having sex with my girlfriend on our kitchen counter. I didn't know what to do. A flood of questions raced through my mind. Was this real, or was I imagining things? Why were they having sex in my house? Feeling utterly defeated, I turned around and left without them noticing. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, crying uncontrollably. But the sadness quickly turned into a burning anger, the same kind I had felt toward those responsible for Amanda's death. I wanted to hurt them, to make them suffer. But as a pacifist, I didn't believe in violence. That's when I knew I was going to punish them and ruin their lives. And what better time to start than right now? I moved my car further up the alley, just far enough away from my driveway so I could still see Harry's car, and then I walked back to the gate, where I could see into the house. I called Catherine's phone. They were still at it when it rang. They both looked at the caller ID and did a double take when my name appeared. I could see Catherine debating whether to answer, but they let it ring out. After a few moments, they resumed their activities, so I dialed her number again. This time she answered. As soon as she did, I hung up and walked back to my car. She called me back almost immediately, asking why I was calling so late. I told her I was about 10 minutes from home and didn't want to scare her by arriving unannounced. She sounded shocked but pretended to be happy that I was coming home. The call ended quickly after she said she was going to change into something else. Now, I said goodbye and hung up. A few moments later, Harry came tearing out of the gate, still half-dressed, and jumped into his car, speeding off like a bat out of hell. I couldn't help but smile a little, knowing the fear they must have felt, thinking they were so close to being caught. I waited a few moments before pulling my car into the same spot where Harry had just been. The rest of the night was uneventful, but after Catherine fell asleep, I got up and went to my office down the hall. I couldn't sleep. I needed to plan, and plan I did. The revenge. My mother always taught me to be a pacifist and let karma take care of things. But this time, I decided karma could use a little push. I was going to punish them separately, but I was determined to destroy them both. I knew Harry had a drug habit, nothing major, but something he kept very private. I had only found out by accident after seeing some coke and weed at his place, though I pretended not to notice when he hastily tried to cover it up. I reached out to some of my more unsavory clients and discreetly asked if they had any samples they could spare. A few days later, I had a decent stash, enough to set my plan in motion. About a month later, I invited some friends, including Harry, over for a barbecue night. After making sure Harry was thoroughly liquored up, I suggested he stay the night and sleep it off. In the early hours of the morning, I took the drugs and a few personal items of mine and stashed them in various spots around his car, placing the largest stash in the tire well. Confident that he wouldn't find them over the next few months as my plan unfolded, I locked his car and went inside to sleep. Later, I also planted some drugs and personal items in his house after driving him home, as he was still too drunk to drive himself. A few days later, I staged a break-in by smashing the back window of my kitchen door and leaving it open before heading back to the city for a flight. As soon as I landed, I had several messages waiting for me. One was from my clearly panicked mom, who had found the back door smashed open and called the police. Another was from a tearful Catherine, and the last was from the local police asking me to call them. After returning all the calls, I informed the police that I was away on business and would be back the following week to talk with them. While I was away, I asked Catherine to stay with my parents until I got back, and I had my dad arrange for a local security company to install cameras and an alarm system after getting the go-ahead from the police to ensure the crime scene wasn't compromised. Once I returned home, I put on the usual act. I can't believe this happened, and why would someone do this? All the while playing the part of the shocked and concerned homeowner. After a thorough check of the house, I discovered that the items I had taken were missing and filed a police report. The security company's representative then walked Catherine and me through how the cameras and alarm system worked. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The question about what to do if we didn't want certain activities recorded. Catherine seemed a bit shy asking, but I knew exactly why she was curious. The rep assured us this was a common question, and he showed us how to disable recording on specific cameras if we needed to, protect her modesty. As I walked him out, I casually asked if we could get notifications if any cameras were turned off, just as an extra security measure. He happily came back inside and helped me set up email alerts before leaving. Perfect. All I had to do now was wait. At this point, I reached out to r/legal advice for some guidance on couples law in my country. I wanted to be sure that my upcoming plan was legally sound and that I wouldn't be forced to pay Catherine any money or equity. I wasn't sure if we were considered a de facto couple or not, and as the sole beneficiary of Amanda's estate, I couldn't afford any nasty surprises. A big shout out to the folks there. They helped me connect with a fantastic lawyer. He assured me that even though Catherine and I had been dating for nearly 4 years, we hadn't lived together long enough to be classified as de facto. Plus, since I was paying all the utilities on the property where she lived and she wasn't paying rent, she had no legal standing to make any financial claims against me. Just to be safe, he drafted a pretty ironclad document in case any legal trouble arose. The following week, my work approached me with a promotion offer to move back to the city and lead the team I was part of. This meant I wouldn't have to travel as much and could stay in one place, while the success of my role in my hometown had them considering sending 3 to 5 representatives to spend 1 to 2 weeks in the larger surrounding towns, including my hometown, as part of my team. I accepted the offer and began the transfer process, which would take about 6 weeks. Perfect. This gave me more than enough time to gather all the evidence I needed. Upon returning to my hometown the following week, I set the rest of my plan in motion. I asked Harry to approve a week's vacation for Catherine in 2 weeks' time. I told him I wanted to send her and a couple of friends on a retreat before I made the biggest decision of my life for the second time. Harry jumped up and gave me a huge hug, congratulating me on being ready to take the plunge again. I hugged him back tightly, though not in the way he probably imagined at the time. He agreed to block out the week and promised not to say anything to anyone, as I wanted it to be a big surprise. Of course, I knew word would spread around the office regardless, but that was all part of my plan. That night, I told Catherine that I had booked her and 2 friends a week-long trip to a tropical spa resort, all expenses paid, no questions asked. Just pick 2 friends and come back to the biggest surprise of her life. She screamed with excitement like a kid who had just been told they could have all the candy in the shop. I then mentioned that the following week I would be in the city preparing for a large client, one of my biggest accounts, and that I needed some of my team members to help. I told her I'd be flying out the following week and wouldn't be home until the Monday she was leaving, so I wouldn't get to see her before she left. She seemed a bit disappointed, but I reassured her that it would all be worth it when she got back. What I didn't tell her was that I had decided to take 2 weeks of vacation on the other side of the country, mentally preparing myself for the chaos that was about to unfold the moment she stepped onto that plane, and enjoying my first taste of freedom. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday, I flew back and started driving home. As I passed by the house, sure enough, Harry's car was parked out front. Just like the first night I caught them, I parked a little further back and checked the cameras. There they were, asleep in my bed. It wasn't a shock. I had been recording them doing this regularly over the past 2 weeks while I was away. I called the police, blocking my caller ID, and told them I was a concerned neighbor who had seen someone hanging around in their car in the alley behind my house, occasionally passing something through the windows to passing cars. I mentioned that I was worried they might be dealing drugs or planning to break into someone's property. I gave them Harry's license plate number and a description of his car. They said they'd send someone over in a few minutes, so I thanked them and hung up. Next, I called Catherine and told her I was about 10 minutes from home. I knew she was flying out the next day, but I wanted to surprise her. Looking back at the footage now, I can't help but laugh at the chaos that followed. Within seconds, Harry was half-dressed and bolting out the back door to his car. It couldn't have played out more perfectly. As Harry sped away, one of the police cars rounded the corner behind me, spotted Harry's car, and gave chase. After pulling into my driveway, I was greeted by an excited Catherine. We did the usual couple stuff, and she eventually fell asleep again. I, on the other hand, couldn't sleep a wink. The next morning, Catherine and her friends were bundled into a car and headed off on their trip. After they left, I waited a few hours and then set my plan into motion. I called a friend of mine who's a removalist and apologized for the late notice, explaining that I needed my place packed and moved by Friday. We agreed on a time, and I instructed him to take certain boxes to a storage facility, which he said wouldn't be a problem. Then, I began packing up Catherine's belongings. Later that day, I got a call from the police asking me to come in and identify some property they had recovered from a suspect the previous night. They said it matched the description of the items I had reported stolen. I couldn't help but grin, knowing that my plan to frame Harry was unfolding perfectly. I told them I'd be there shortly to collect the items. Naturally, a few of the items were still missing, most likely because they were still in Harry's house, which hadn't been searched yet. By this time, word had spread throughout the entire town. In a small town like ours, secrets don't stay buried for long. Harry was humiliated and swiftly fired for having drugs and stolen property, and later in the week, both of our bosses issued a formal apology to me on behalf of the company. That night, I went to my parents' house and told both my parents and Amanda's parents what had happened, leaving out certain details. I also explained that I was moving back to the city after being promoted and that Catherine wouldn't be a part of it. They were initially upset that I hadn't let them know what was going on, but they were glad I was handling the situation maturely and hadn't stooped to Catherine and Harry's level. They didn't completely agree with me ghosting Catherine, but after some drinks, laughs, and tears, they were more supportive. On Friday afternoon, after a hectic week of organizing cleaners for the following week, contacting the real estate agent to put my house on the rental market, and wrapping up various tasks at the hometown office, I packed some things into my car and drove to my parents' place to say goodbye before hitting the road. Before leaving town, I stopped by Becky's house. Becky had been one of Amanda's closest friends growing up, and the only person who knew what was happening, minus the details about Harry. Without her help, I wouldn't have been able to organize everything as quickly as I had. I handed Becky a large manila folder containing the evidence I had gathered of Catherine's cheating, along with a letter and some legal documents from my attorney stating that Catherine was not to contact me, and details about how to access her belongings at the storage unit I had rented. After a quick goodbye, I drove back to the city. On Sunday, I woke up to several missed calls, voicemails, and text messages. Turns out, Catherine had come home early after hearing rumors that something was up in town, only to find an empty house with a "for rent" sign out front. In a panic, she went to my parents' house, but they shut the door on her as soon as they answered, leaving her to call everyone she could think of until she finally managed to get in touch with Becky. Becky told her that she had a package for her. Needless to say, Catherine didn't take it well. By then, I knew exactly what to expect from the numerous angry texts and voicemails from her accusing me of setting Harry up, being deceitful, and more. I was worried she might show up at my front door, but nothing ever happened. Now, 5 weeks later, after being fired and promoted, I am writing this for you, dear reader. It's a long story and I had to rewrite it several times to cut it in half, but I feel that most of what I shared was important to this story. Now on to the next story. My wife had an affair with our dog sitter. My wife, 35, lost her sister in December of 2019. Her sister had been pretty sick for a long time, but no one really expected her to die so suddenly. She was 8 months pregnant with our daughter at the time. They had just bought a new house and her folks were moving to our area since we needed help with the kids. Then, in March, COVID hit. Therefore, because of all this, my wife never really got the chance to be able to properly grieve for her sister's release. Looking back, I realized the biggest mistake I made was not recognizing how deep the tension was between my wife and her sister. They never had a good relationship. They were always at odds, and whenever my wife talked about her, it was usually something that had annoyed her. Things did start to improve a bit after our first child was born in 2018. But their relationship never really reached a point where you could call it good. So, when her sister passed, it hit my wife and her family really hard. I tried to be supportive and did everything I could when it first happened. As time passed, my wife rarely mentioned her sister except around her birthday or the anniversary of her death. During those times, I would be there for her, but throughout the year, I didn't bring up her sister or check in on how my wife was dealing with it. This was a huge mistake on my part. Because they hadn't been close, I assumed she wasn't struggling as much as she actually was. This past December, my side of the family planned our Christmas gathering on the anniversary of her sister's death. My wife told me that it was a tough day for her, and I passed that along to my family. But they decided that day worked best for everyone, and I didn't push back, which I now deeply regret, knowing what I do. Well, after that day, my wife kept pulling away from me. We had fabulous sex chemistry and were an average 4-5 times a week couple, but that came to utter halt. When I inquired as to what was happening, she stated that her sister had died, and she just wasn't really into the whole sex thing. I got it, and I did not press the matter anymore. It was not just the sex that dried up. We were one of those super physical couples who hugged/kissed/held hands/cuddled on the couch all the time. We even spooned and passed out together every night. But that all ended in the next week or two. She no longer wore her wedding ring, which was a major red flag for me, and she stopped responding "I love you too" when I said it first. She became extremely distant. Every time I attempted to start a serious conversation regarding the glaring connection that loomed ominously between us, she would deny and tell me it was her means of coping with old issues over not being able to forgive or have closure for what had happened in hell with Celeste Castle. She promised that it had nothing to do with our relationship. She just needed time off her own emotional roller coaster. I did my best to support her, but she would not open up about it, nor tell me what was going on with her sister. I pleaded with her to speak, but she simply said that she did not want to. That was how January went. By February, it was practically as though we were simply housemates who co-parented. We never really spoke, and when we did, it was just awkward, shallow small talk. At mealtimes, I would inquire after her day, work or axe-throwing hobby, and only receive one-word answers. I would try to sit her down and talk seriously with her, maybe once a week. I knew she was still grieving her sister, but it quickly became apparent that this wasn't about the ongoing grief process. This is a deeper issue between us. Each time we tried to talk and every conversation began with me asking her to let me in, I found myself blaming us for what had happened. During this period, I learned a guy she knew, predating me and we met, that he had popped into her work in the new year. She explained to me that they had a conversation, and he noticed she was sad and struggling. She racked with sobs and spilled to him all that had been going on. The truth is, however much I wanted to be that person for her, and she later told me it was easier somehow with him, actually, this guy, we'll call him John, started helping out with a new puppy my wife brought home from work. The puppy was maniacal. We were never home because of both our schedules, and even when we were, she destroyed everything. He offered to dog sit, and between him and us, the pup was pretty well taken care of. But this arrangement meant my wife was seeing John 2 to 3 times a week when she dropped off or picked up the dog. She started staying out late and was barely around the house anymore. When I asked her about it, she would just say she needed space. I should also mention that at the end of January and the beginning of February, she started sleeping in our spare bedroom, saying she just needed more space. At this point, every alarm in my body was going off about John and the whole situation. Our relationship was really strained, and I didn't want to add accusations of cheating into the mix, so I naively chose not to ask or push the issue. More weeks went by like this. Last week, less than 12 months after I inquired with my doctor about the vasectomy referral, they called me to say that I could perform it Friday. My wife had gotten for her birthday a chef in the bush experience, where you hike out into some place in the woods and enjoy on-the-spot cooking by your personal chef of a 5-course menu. I told her that because of the procedure on Friday, I obviously wouldn't be able to go hiking into the woods on Saturday. She immediately asked if she could bring a friend instead of canceling. She said she was going to bring a friend of hers, Jenny, who was going through some things of her own. I said that was fine, although my mind was spiraling, thinking she was actually going to bring John. She went on the excursion and was gone all day, not getting home until around 7 p.m. When she got home, I asked her all about it, and she spun quite a tale about everything she and Jenny did and ate and how amazing it all was. She plugged in her phone and went for a shower. I have never been the snooping type, but I felt absolutely compelled to check her phone, and there it was, all of it. She wasn't even trying to hide it in her phone because she knew I never went through it. There were over a month's worth of messages between them, telling each other how in love they were, and all sorts of photos together over the past month. Kissing, cuddling, holding hands. Nothing explicit, but it was enough. My hands started shaking uncontrollably, and my heart was racing. My worst fear had come true. I immediately confronted her when she got out of the shower, and she admitted it. I asked if they had slept together, which she denied, but I obviously think she's lying about that. After the fact, I found out that the guy she said she used to work with was actually an ex-boyfriend, a detail she conveniently left out when she first told me about him. Back when they worked together, he was married and she was single, and they had an affair that ruined his marriage. I should mention he's 10 years older than her. Now he's single and she was married, and they had, or maybe are still having, an affair that ruined her marriage. This all happened just 2 days ago, and I feel so low. I don't want to say the last 10 years of my life were wasted because they gave me my 2 children whom I love more than anything. But for lack of a better term, it feels wasted. Now, the thought of having to start over again is just so shitty. I thought I had the perfect life, but it's all gone. The thing that absolutely tears my heart out is knowing that now I'll only get to see half of my small children's childhood. Half the holidays, just half of their lives, and it makes me cry every time I think about it, including right now. Now on to the next story. My wife slept with supervisor for promotion. Now he lost both his job and family. I'm 28 and I recently discovered that my wife, who's also 28, had an affair with her former boss, a 35-year-old man who's married with kids. We have been together for 5 years now, and our firsts in love and life were all done with each other. We've known each other from our very childhood and now live across the street. It used to be 5 steps away after we just moved in together. She has been the only constant in my life since then. Just looking at both of us really shows how much love comes from broken homes. Every day I wonder whether it was we who changed things for the better. No, that's what I tell myself anyway. She had been working from home ever since I got my start doing so as well, but now the missus is back out at work. She's in a field where women are few and far between, and later she could tell me about how her place of employment was very much like a boys' club. The guy she had an affair with, her boss at the time, and now supposedly one of the good ones who watched out for her on job-related matters. It wasn't long ago at all that the wife got a promotion, and I was absolutely beside myself with joy. She had become a manager now, which meant assuming more duties than before, in addition to needing several business trips per year. Her first trip occurred just last week, from Wednesday through Friday. Before she left, I told her that cheerleaders at home would give impromptu performances. She told me on the telephone that she was leaving her heart with me. "Take good care of it," she said, that phrase she always uses when we're separated for long periods of time. Earlier this week, she came home from work strangely than usual, and I knew right off something was amiss. She looked very upset indeed, and there was a red mark on her right cheek. My wife is fair-complexioned, so bruises easily, that I asked her what had happened at once, but all she said was "hold me," and then she nestled close to me. It was only after a few minutes that she got up from where she had sat me on the couch and told me what had happened. My whole world. She admitted that she slept with her ex-boss when this business trip took place. For me, it was even difficult to understand at first. It felt as though I were watching someone else's life collapse. Or perhaps she would reveal that the whole thing had been nothing but a giant joke. Actually, I think a dirty prank would have been preferable. I was in a daze and said not one word while she confessed this. Cheating strikes a particularly raw nerve with me, as it does with many people. When my father had an affair, my own family was torn apart. It was I who caught him and told my mother. Even now, my relationship with Dad is strained because he still blames me for destroying the family, never forgiven me. And she knew all of this. She knows too well how my family was wrecked by infidelity, which was enough toffee words for her even to think about letting me go. She even supported me as a teenage boy over this issue, and now she has done the same? Apparently the matter came up on one occasion when the man's wife discovered it and challenged him and my wife at their own place of work. This turned out to be quite a scene, with employees and customers looking on, partly out of amusement, but mostly in sheer astonishment. The woman called my wife white trash and slapped her across the face. After that, some employees stepped up and escorted the woman out of the building. My wife telephoned her elder sister afterward. She needed to tell everything she admitted to her sister. But I just sat there speechless. She said something to me. The only thing I was able to think of asking was just what did happen on that business trip. The other evening, she explained to me she went out drinking with the other team leads and stayed out late as she thought she had to join in for team bonding. As one guest after another left until only she and her former boss were left, he suggested going back to his room for some music. My wife went along with it. He kept on flattering her, saying how lovely she was and that if he were me, he could not help but caress her. At long last, he kissed her. My wife asserted that she was not thinking properly at the time and allowed him to go right on kissing her until they made love. I just couldn't bear to listen to anymore, so I stood up and told her to cut it out. When she reached out to take my hand, I pulled it away and told her not to. She began to cry. She apologized again and again, pleading with me for forgiveness. She said that she felt it was the biggest mistake of her life. She hated herself for it and wished she could undo everything. "I only love you," she kept repeating. "There's nobody else but you." The alcohol had also confused her sense of values. "He really needs to leave," I told her. "Go call your sister to pick you up." She got up, still crying, and endeavored to embrace me, but I moved away from her once more. She kept exhorting me not to do this, suggesting she should quit her job or let me have full access to her telephone, see a psychiatrist. But I couldn't bear it any longer. I told her if she didn't go, I would leave. I didn't even take time to pack a bag. I just walked out of the house. Seizing my arm, she tried to prevent me from departing, and she was still begging for mercy after all that we'd been through. Heartrending in any case to think of her like this. As I left her behind weeping, it was as if my heart were being torn from my chest. 'Cause I still love her. I loved her more than I ever thought possible to love another person. But she wrecked me. She destroyed everything we had built up together, everything we might have had. Driving to my mother's place, where I am staying now, I do not know how I managed to make the whole journey without breaking down. As soon as I arrived, however, I burst into tears. I don't think my own mother has ever seen me cry, not since I was a little boy anyway. The only person who has ever seen me cry is my wife. When I visited my mother, I simply told her what had happened and tried not to hide anything. I couldn't. She felt the same as I did about it. They've always been close. She treated my wife as though she were her own child. She left judgment to someone else and only told me that she was welcome in her house for as long as it took me to get set up again. After I left, my wife has been constantly calling and texting me, but I haven't answered. The text begged me to go home. They begged me to talk to her. They begged me to say where I am, and they begged me not to give up on her. I feel so very lost and hurt. I thought I'd known suffering, but nothing compares to actually living the experience. I never thought my wife could take that approach. I'd always thought the saying, "once a cheat, forever a cheat," was true. It would have meant obliterating a relationship. However, I keep wondering whether I should give us another chance, whether to live in counseling, rebuilding the future out of our collective past. I can't help but keep thinking about our history, how much I love her, how we always fitted together so perfectly, and how when I really had none else, there was always her. This week has been the most agonizing of my life. Nothing seems stable anymore as everything crumbles around me. I'm struggling through this alone as my wife, my best friend, and greatest source of support is no longer by my side. Doubt had been growing in my mind, so yesterday, I decided to reach out to the other person hurt in all this, hoping she could provide the clarity I so desperately sought. She had no reason to skew the truth or withhold information. I searched for and found her on Facebook, sending a message requesting we talk. She responded swiftly, offering a video call. I agreed to speak with her right away. Even before a word was said, I could see in her eyes she shared my affliction. She told me how, after being removed from their work last Monday, she tried contacting me but could not find my information. Apparently, one of the last things she said to my wife was that she intended to tell me everything. As she said this, I recalled my wife rushing home that day, and her sister insisting I hear the news directly from her. I asked if she knew more about what truly happened on the work trip, or if it was truly just a one-time mistake, and how she came to discover the deception. What she divulged confirmed my darkest fears. Their relationship had been unfolding long before that trip. She showed documented proof, texts revealing in profound emotional infidelity. Sharing her screen with me, I could barely maintain my composure viewing what was exposed. She explained that last January, she noticed her husband withdrawing and losing interest. On a few occasions, she saw him messaging my wife purportedly about work, but he hand-waved it as nothing of import. The day before their vacation, when bringing him something left behind at the office, she found him with my wife, standing close in an intimate manner, joking and smiling in a way that seemed flirty. Upon noticing her arrival, they abruptly separated, with my wife appearing panic-stricken while her husband pretended all was well. That was when she knew something untoward transpired between them, though she opted not to immediately confront him, wanting irrefutable evidence he couldn't weasel out of. Following their trip, her husband distanced himself further and dismissed her advances. That night, awaiting his slumber, she inspected his phone. Within his text thread with my wife laid everything, intimate exchanges preceding their vacation. It began as emotional infidelity, with AP professing inability to focus at work around my wife's presence. The messages evidence AP initiating pursuit of my wife, though her lack of rebuttal mattered not. Some texts prior to their trip saw AP disparaging his wife, lamenting her repeated miscarriages. It was revolting how he spoke of her to my wife. Repeatedly he asserted perhaps needing a woman like my wife. There were Thursday evening drinks invitation texts to my wife and morning messages evidently denoting they copulated. My wife thereafter ceased responding. I found myself at a loss, unable to escape the turbulence of the situation. With care not to stir her sleeping children, she maintained a guarded exterior while inner turmoil raged. Though anger simmered just below the surface, confrontation would wait. Humiliation was to be had on her terms and in a public forum. Monday's light would bring her plan into action, laying bare wrongs for peers and patrons to judge. While intention had built over time, chance alone exposed the damning scene to another wronged wife, and retaliation knew no bounds. Attempts to stem the tide went unheeded as wrath poured forth. Targets broadened beyond the primary culprit to all complicit in betrayal. OBS then explained to me that her husband displayed no remorse after their confrontation, only fury towards her public outburst. I learned from her that AP was terminated the next day after the incident. One of the hardest things she ever had to do was sit her twins down and tell them everything, trying to explain it in a way they could understand. I knew exactly how she felt, remembering my own mother's anguish following my father's betrayal. OBS said this whole ordeal exposed her husband's true colors, and while he pursued another woman, my wife still played a role in their affair, and as a woman, she had no empathy or esteem for my wife. I told her I didn't fault her sentiments, that she deserved to feel however she wanted in that moment. She apologized on behalf of her husband's actions. I paused, searching for the right words, then expressed regret over my wife's part in it all. She said, "We're now stuck in a club together, a club our spouses unwillingly inducted us into, against our will." She asked about my wife and I's current situation. I replied that honestly, I didn't have a clue about our future, but that I wasn't staying with her for the time being. She wished me the best going forward, and I did the same for her in return. Before hanging up, we swapped contact information in case either of us ever needed someone who understands to talk to. Every raw emotion I had been feeling only intensified tenfold. I confided in my mother about what I had learned during our discussion, and though she still didn't pass judgment, I could tell she was upset with my wife too. A whirlwind of emotions raged within as I contemplated AP's downfall. A twisted sense of satisfaction emerged that his indiscretions had ravaged his life and health, though such vengeful thoughts brought me no pleasure. Immense guilt weighed upon me as well, for an innocent wife now faced losing her partner while her children's stability crumbled. How their young hearts would ache in the days to come, forced to reconcile all they held dear disintegrating before them. Against my wife too simmered anger, for her betrayal had not only destroyed our solemn vows but jeopardized my well-being. Our intimacy following her return offered no reassurance, as text from that trip hinted at careless acts leaving me vulnerable to unknown risks. So many lives damaged by reckless actions, and in the wreckage only more hurt would be found. Now on to the next story. My daughter's drunken confession shattered my world. My disabled wife has been unfaithful. I'm not sure if this is the right place to talk about this, but things are getting so desperate. My wife and I have been together for 25 years, since we met in high school. We've been married 19 of those years. We were high school sweethearts and have 2 great children, a son and a daughter. I thought our marriage was strong and different from those of friends and coworkers. Indeed, we would stand the test of time. How naive I was. My wife has been a homemaker for nearly all our marriage, something we both agreed upon. However, after the children went to college and this house grew still more silent, she began to feel as though empty nest syndrome was getting to her. She expressed how unfulfilled and lost in identity she felt. I tried to cheer her up and suggested we take up hobbies together, go out in new places, perhaps even adopting some puppies. At first, she readily agreed. Then suddenly, though soon she started to say that she wanted to be more and not just drift through life. I could understand this viewpoint and was willing to back her, with she not being a sit-or-still person ever. She confided in some friends, and one of them assisted her in obtaining an interview at a real estate firm where she had previously been employed. After giving birth to both children, I would see the mother just as often in the nursery as ever nursing, and always tired. I was both excited and happy for her when she was offered the job. At first, everything seemed to go well, but she changed a little within the first year. She started going out after work for drinks with her colleagues, came home and texted endlessly into the wee hours of night, and began wearing different clothes, which were more revealing than usual, though nothing you would classify as improper. In fact, she even started wearing a new kind of perfume. The reason I really began to get worried was that one day when I picked up her cell phone, I was not snooping and just happened to glance over, see a message from a male colleague. The message was one that a woman might send to a man whom she likes and had nothing to do with work at all. When I asked her, she seemed a little flustered, but assured me that they were just friends and she would talk to this person about the improper messages, not wanting to become a gaunt, suspicious husband. I chose to believe her and let it pass. Damn, how I wish that had not been my decision. As time went on, her conduct became ever more strange. She started talking about wanting to be spontaneous in life and even tried some weed. I teased that she sounded like an older version of our children, but turned serious when she came out with this bombshell one night after she was drunk. She said she thought that maybe I was putting out her light. This completely knocked the wind out of my sails, and I felt like I was letting her down in some way, thus making every possible effort to improve our relationship, including arranging for counseling sessions, but to no avail. From that time on, her bizarre actions ceased. She said she was sorry for the way things had gone down and that it was as if she had forgot who she was, but she just couldn't bear to lose what we'd had at home. She resigned from her job and we had marriage counseling. It was hard at first, but things improved dramatically. Our marriage was better than ever for 2 years. She was more attentive at home, took the initiative in sex more often, and settled me with affection. The only hitch was her relationship with our daughter started going down the tubes. I asked my wife about it, but she brushed it off as just being a phase or woman thing. Once more, I believed her. Interestingly enough, during this time, my relationship with our daughter got better. She rang me up more often, met me for coffee or lunch during the week, and even gave me presents like t-shirts and so. I always argued it wasn't necessary, but she insisted. I could see she wanted to say something, but was holding back. Tragedy somehow struck. One night, my wife was returning from grocery shopping when she was hit by a drunk driver. She lost the use of her legs and has been in a wheelchair ever since. Things became truly hard and even suggested I sleep with other women, but obviously refused. I put it down to her depression and reassured her that I wasn't going anywhere, because this made her cry and she asked why I was so good to her or what she had ever done to deserve me. Once more, I thought it was simply her depression speaking and did my utmost to comfort her. The doctor saw an enlargement on my wife's throat during a regular checkup, and it was larger than normal. In case it was cancerous, they needed a biopsy done of this lump in the neck. I couldn't think straight, but my wife just sat there blankly upon hearing it, wordlessly at first and then laughing hysterically, saying this is my retribution for what I did. We finally calmed her down, but she asked that we go out to eat together as a family before the biopsy was done. So we did. I approved. We had our kids and our nearest cousins over. I talked about how my wife was my light in life and we would get through this yet together. However, I noticed that our daughter looked uncomfortable. It could have been because of the situation. Maybe not. Later that day, my daughter called me when she was plastered, begging that I shouldn't hate her. Initially, I was bewildered at the thought, but I reassured her that under no conditions would I ever hate you, because you are the apple of my eye and I will not disdain you ever. Then she told me that when her mother was away on business at the real estate company, her mother saved her own lover, whom I do not know the head person. This occurred during my wife's period as a real estate executive. My daughter decided to go on a driving trip with her friends, and so they stopped at a diner where they don't usually eat, but there she saw her mother kissing a man who is definitely not me. My relationship with my daughter apparently improved due to the decline in their relationship. My wife was in tears when she told me it was the coworker from the messages. She couldn't deny that either and admitted it was far and away the dumbest thing she'd ever done. She said he made multiple advancements on her and finally got through her resistance. She told me that coveting my daughter's virtue was when she recognized what a dreadful situation had developed. She wanted to take it to the grave, as she had never wanted to hurt me in her life. She was just too cowardly of a person to confess and therefore begged our daughter not tell me. I feel completely devastated by this news and don't know what to do. Every aspect of our relationship involves questioning today's date. 5 years ago. Where did I go wrong? My wife tells me I am a good husband, that none of this is my fault. The problem is, since finding out about it, my feeling towards her has changed markedly. I still look after her, but it's more like a nurse looking after a patient than a husband taking care of his wife. Actually, for someone to leave her, that would be alone. Even if I leave her, she's totally stuck. Financially, emotionally, she's dependent on me for everything, and this just seems so unfair. Now on to the next story. My wife, who has been struggling with alcoholism and erratic behavior for 7 years, just admitted to cheating throughout our entire dating relationship. This story spans over 15 years. I met my wife when we were both 19 out at a club. We were both into partying and did a lot of it. Back then, I was in a friends with benefits arrangement with another girl, and I kept that going for the first few months of dating my wife. For the next couple of years, until I was 21, we had massive fights and would break up. Or at least it felt like it. And during those times, I cheated on her again with the same woman. It was a terrible thing to do, and I always felt guilty about it. Eventually, I decided to end the FWB situation for good and give my relationship with my wife a real chance, even though I thought we might eventually break up. But that never happened. Our relationship grew stronger, we both finished university, I started a business, and she got a job. Things were going well, and I even took her to Hawaii to propose. A few months before the wedding, I started having serious doubts about getting married, mainly because of the guilt I felt about my past infidelities. Everyone, including myself, saw her as this sweet and innocent girl, which made cheating on her feel even worse. After a few tumultuous weeks, she said she still wanted to get married and that we could work through it. So, we did. The next 7 years of marriage were incredibly difficult, and I don't mean just the typical marriage is hard kind of difficult. I mean, things were seriously messed up. She fell into a deep depression and blamed it all on me. I was made to feel like absolute garbage nearly every day. All the love, romance, and connection between us completely died. Her drinking kept escalating, and I've been punched in the face more times than I can count. I was held bounced from work and hospital due to poor mental health, and it's left me with my head camp. I've been bitten so badly that I needed medical treatment, stabbed in the head with a wine glass, and tortured with sleep deprivation. Sometimes we went months without sex, and when COVID started, she basically moved into the guest room for an entire year. A few months back, she tried to kill herself with medications and alcohol. I spent the entire Easter weekend avoiding my family while sitting with her in the hospital as she detoxed for a week, followed by 3 weeks in rehab. Since she's been out, she was supposed to continue her therapy sessions, but she hasn't gone even once and has started drinking every day again. Most of her yelling and screaming is directed at me, blaming me for hurting her so much and expressing how much she hates me. During the 7 years we've been married, she's had about 15 jobs, despite having multiple degrees. But none of them lasted more than a few months, mostly because of her drinking. So I've paid every single bill and expense for practically the entire time I've known her. I even give money to her poor family overseas. I'm always there for her and her family in every way, while she doesn't do anything like that for me. I recently bought us a really nice first house, which I had to pay for entirely on my own, and now the time is approaching for us to start a family. The fear of the new house and kids sent her into a drunken rage, where she got furious at me for not wanting to talk about what I did with my FWB. The main reason I avoid it is because, after 7 years of being tortured over it, I hate talking about it and shut down immediately, especially if she's been drinking. I blamed myself for all of this. Afterward, I realized that by not being open and talking about it, she felt like I was lying to her. So we sat down and had a calm conversation where I just explained what happened. There wasn't anything new that I hadn't told her before. I was just more comfortable discussing it this time. We've had hundreds of drunken nights over the years, having deep conversations about our history and life. Many times we asked each other, "Is there anything else? Is there anything else I should know?" She always said no, but I never really believed that. I had accepted that she had done something and that I would never know what it was. So I just let life go on. But the next day, or maybe later that night, she let it slip that she had slept with another guy I didn't know about. When I pressed her on who it was, she told me it was her old boyfriend from another state, and it happened about a year before we got married. Instantly, I was reminded of a time when we were dating, and she had left her phone with me when she went home. She sent me a message saying something like, "Hey, I left my phone, can you hold it for me? I love you, good night." A few minutes later, an email notification popped up on her phone for a hotel booking confirmation. She was supposed to be at work. I went a bit crazy thinking about what was going on, so the next morning I drove to the hotel near the airport over an hour away to see what was happening. I saw her car there, managed to call her room, and found her number. I stormed in there like a madman, trying to catch her in the act. There was screaming, security got involved, it was chaos. But she was alone, and I was forced to leave. She made me feel like a crazy psycho, claiming she just wanted some space from work and that this was the cheapest hotel she could find. I'm such an idiot. So, as it turns out, I was just a few hours early, and this was actually the third time they had met up. She tried to explain that I couldn't understand because what they had was real love and affection and desire. She said they just wanted each other so much and she didn't feel that with me. The days following her confession have left me in a state of shock. I couldn't believe it, but at the same time, I wasn't entirely surprised that she had cheated. What really cut deep was finding out that she was so in love with this guy, while I was doing all the work of being a boyfriend, getting none of the real love or affection in return. Honestly, what a piece of trash. He had to screw up our relationship despite having the whole world of dating apps at his disposal. He's getting married in a few weeks, and I'm seriously tempted to mess up his life the way he's ruined mine. Anyway, I didn't get angry with her about it. I had cheated, so it only seemed fair, right? I just needed time to process everything. That was the beginning of what I now know as the trickle truth. Over the last few days, it turns out she was cheating most of the time we were dating and engaged. I understand that I didn't own her. We weren't married, and if she wanted to sleep around, fine. But it should have been equal. I just feel used. My friends always thought I was crazy for letting her go out clubbing without me, but I trusted her friend, who I also considered my friend. But apparently, girls' night out meant going out to get drunk and hook up with whoever they could. So I'll probably never really know the full extent of it, but so far, this is what I've learned. She slept with 2 different exes during our first year of dating. She was having a lesbian relationship with one of her friends pretty much the entire time we were dating, and she even invited this friend to our wedding. These two would go out clubbing together and not invite me, so they could spend the whole night making out, being together, and then going home to have sex. She had another sexual experience with one of her other female friends. She slept with this old boyfriend 3 times, but she let it slip that he wasn't flying here just for her because he has family here. So who knows how many times they actually hooked up. She had unprotected sex with 2 different random guys in nightclub bathrooms within 6 months of us getting married. And basically, she made out with possibly hundreds of people whenever she went out without me. This is all she's told me so far, and I have no idea how I'm supposed to deal with all of this. This woman has used me, abused me, manipulated me, and physically and emotionally assaulted me. I put up with all of it because I felt like I had done such a terrible thing to her and she would never let it go. For 7 years, I have been constantly attacked for how my actions hurt her. She didn't even try to forgive me and move forward or make our marriage anything other than pain and misery. I can't understand how she could do this to me. I get it. I was a fool too. People do stupid things, and it sounds like she had a real blast, so I really doubt she regrets any of it. But here's where I'm really struggling. I was never wrong. Every single time I was suspicious and things didn't make sense was a time when something was going on behind my back. As you've heard, our marriage, especially in the beginning, was unbelievably bad. The hate she had for me, the lies. One time, I found her booking secret hotels again because she had lost her job and needed somewhere to go. She had been fired and didn't tell me, and then used what little money she had on a hotel room for herself while we were really struggling financially and desperately needed a second income. Every single time, she would let me down. So, I've had a lot of suspicions during our marriage, and I'm finding it extremely hard to believe that someone who has lied and manipulated me nearly every day I've known her would suddenly stop just because we got married. She got away with it all. Now she's depressed and ashamed. She says she didn't know what real love was, but now she finally feels it with me. She claims she loves me so much and that I'm her entire world now. She says she struggled with her sexuality, being bisexual, and that she had to hide it. This is a bullshit excuse to me. I've always known she was bi and never held it against her. I would have been very open to exploring that with her, but she keeps using her sexuality as an excuse for what she's done to me, while always reminding me that she would never be open to sharing me with someone else. A few months ago, she was telling me she wanted to go outside of our marriage to explore having sex with a woman, but wasn't okay with me doing the same, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, that's been my last 7 days and I'm not processing it well. If I'm not drinking, I just start breaking down. I have given this woman everything and all she ever did was take and use everything against me. The only thing I know is that I don't really know anything and I probably never will. I don't trust a word out of her mouth. In the past, she's used these kinds of stories to break me down for a few months, only to recant or tell me she made it up, which now I have to question as maybe none of it was made up after all. I've worked from home for years, and since she's an unemployed bum, she's around basically 24 hours a day every day, so I don't think anything has been going on for some time. But it feels like it's just too late and it will definitely happen again. It was just so much, not just a few times, but an insane number of times. I mean, I'm sure it could get worse, and I'm also sure it probably will. How could I possibly have a family with this? Obviously, there's so much I don't know, not that it really matters, I suppose. My 2 biggest issues are how I've been treated during this marriage. If what she says now is true, I should never have been treated the way I was all this time. The betrayal from someone I've sacrificed everything for. The last thing that happened was over 7 years ago, but it's not like those 7 years have been great. I was already ready to leave at the rehab stage because things had gotten so bad. Sorry for how long this was. If anyone got through it all, thank you for being there. This has been one of the hardest weeks of my life, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not holding up well at all. How do I survive this? I never feel like I'll be the same person again.